And welcome back to the Law News Network. We just played, or replayed, I should say, the defense's opening statement in the ADRIAN LOYA matter. What we saw from the defense's opening statements was the fact that they did focus that it is the prosecution's burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did in fact commit these crimes. However, because of the fact that the defendant here in this case is claiming mental disease and defect as a result, that shows an extra, that's something extra that the prosecution or the defense has to show as well, that the reason why these crimes were committed was due to the fact that the defendant in this case had a mental disease or defect and could not appreciate the nature of the crimes and could not appreciate the fact that what he was doing was either wrong, or if he realized that what he was doing was wrong, he could not conform to the law as a result of the focus in his mental disease or defect, that he was so focused on the victims in this case that he could not do anything otherwise. So we have the pleasure of having Joyce Kendrick with us today. She is a brilliant legal mind and has provided us with great legal analysis in the past here at the Law News Network. So thank you so much for being with us today, Joyce.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So what we saw here is the defense focusing on the burden of proof here in this case. And then so we have also the fact that there is a mental disease or defect claim. Why don't you talk about that a little bit to the members, not to the members of the jury, I'm sorry. that's the prosecutor and me coming out to our viewers. Describe what the claim of mental disease or defect does in this case, or in the case in general.
Well, I believe that what they're trying to say is that at the time of the crime, he was not in his, that he was experiencing some type of a delusion, which made him unable to appreciate his actions at the time of this murder, what takes place. So, and they're not really saying that he did not do it. Mm-hmm. What the defense is really saying is that he should not be held responsible.
Right.
For his actions.
Right, and so that's not something that we see often, and the defense attorney in this case did say that or allude to that in his opening statements. The fact that this is not a whodunit kind of a case. We know who actually did it, but could he have appreciated the acts that he committed at that time due to the fact that he was just so fixated on the victims in this case? Not necessarily the officer who was wounded, who came out to aid in the situation, but he was actually fixated on the TRUBNIKOVAs in this case. So the fact that we have mental disease and defect here, the claim by the defense, is quite difficult in some cases. That's another, I guess, claim that the jury will have to consider when they go back into, or when they're back in the jury deliberation room right now. So what I wanted to actually, we're going to throw to a clip in which what happened last week at the end of the case, when the juror members were actually, when the judge was sending the jury members back into the deliberation, the defendant in this case actually muttered or had an utterance out in the courtroom. And what he said was, what we believe is guilty, 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 or not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. And here at the Law News Network, we were able to cover that, and that was actually brought to the judge's attention as a result of the coverage that we had last week. So what we're going to do now is we're going to throw to this clip. It's actually a very short clip that we have, and then we'll just talk about that a little bit. Okay?
Okay, sounds good.
And we're back. We saw that it was a really, really short clip. What we actually were able to see in that clip is him muttering, guilty, guilty, guilty. And so what we later found out is that the juror members actually did hear him say that, or they saw him mutter that, and they were actually discussing that back in the deliberation room. So let's talk about this a little bit. This is something that we know it's not appropriate in a courtroom, especially coming from a defendant. But what I want to talk about is, why do you think that actually happened? Do you think that this is going into his claim of mental disease and defect, that he would mutter or utter something like that in the courtroom at all? What do you think about that?
Well, I think if he's diagnosed with a mental illness, He may be experiencing some psychiatric symptoms. I mean, this is a stressful thing for someone who's mentally ill, to be at trial. That's why we have competency hearings. I'm surprised that the defense did not have a conversation with the judge about whether or not there should be a mistrial or that there should be some sort of curative instruction given.
Right.
Because that's what I would have done. I mean, and it may be that the client is decompensating right before our eyes, and that's what we're seeing, which means that there may be an interruption in the trial. The trial may have to stop. That's what the motion I would be making, that he's now not competent to sit through the trial. Because you can be on trial and have this defense and maybe be competent at the time, able to sit through the trial.
Right.
But he may be decompensating now, and so things may change. And even though that's an inconvenience for the trial judge and for the courts in general, I would say at this point he's not competent and that the trial should stop.
Oh wow, that's something nobody has actually really said, because what happened was the judge actually admonished him in the courtroom, stating that, you know, if he ever did something like that again, that he would not be invited to come back into the courtroom. But that is something to consider. Is he able to proceed forward in this case right now? Is you know, his the mental aspect of it is, will he be able to proceed forward with this case? And now that the jury is actually in deliberation right now, you know, this is something that remains to be seen. What we're going to do right now is going to throw to that clip one more time, because I don't know if the sound, if our members were actually able to hear the sound. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw to that clip with the sound of ADRIAN LOYA saying guilty, guilty, guilty. And what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to talk about the Holly Bobo matter. And, you know, this was just, if you heard that, if you were able to hear what he was saying, he whispered it, and he was just saying,
yeah, because it seems like, I mean, I work with people who are mentally ill. In fact, in my office, that's what I do. I represent people who are charged with serious crimes and are mentally ill.
Right.
And my experience, and I'm not a doctor, but it seems as though he's responding to some other, like, auditory hallucination that he's hearing. He's hearing something, and it sounded like, almost like he turned and was talking to this voice that he's hearing. And so I think that's a very clear indication that there's something going on. And for the judge to admonish him, I feel, in my opinion, this is something that he can't control. You know, it's like you can't admonish, you can admonish someone who's in control of their actions. Right. But if this is something he's responding to almost involuntarily because it's a mental illness, then it doesn't seem fair that you would hold that against him. And if I were the defense attorney, I would really have been asking for a sidebar so I could speak to the judge. Maybe there needs to be some type of examination done. And I know they've gone through this whole trial, and we're at this point now, and maybe the judge will feel like just a curative instruction, instructing the jury not to really put any, you know, emphasis or consider that in their analysis would help. But I definitely think that's probably what happened right there.
Well, yeah, I mean, at this point, we can only speculate as to what it was, unfortunately. But, you know, that was just something, you know, that happens all the time here at the LawNewz Network. There's always something that happens or something that happens during a trial that we can't anticipate. And, you know, this being, you know, this being another instance of that. And, you know, as a trial attorney, you know, there are things within the trial that you can't expect to happen. I mean, I'm pretty sure his, you know, defense attorneys wouldn't have expected something like that to happen at all. So, you know, great points that you made here today in regards to the LOYA matter. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to actually talk about the Holly Bobo case. It's Tennessee versus Zachary Adams. Zachary Adams is actually one of the defendants who has been charged in the murder and aggravated rape and aggravated kidnapping of Holly Bobo. So we know know that this actually happened. The trial is actually being held in Decatur County, but this happened in Hardin County, which is where Holly Bobo was living at the time. This happened on April the 13th of 2011. Holly Bobo was actually last seen alive being led into the woods by an individual wearing camouflage clothing. I believe her brother saw her being led into the woods, but actually assumed it was her boyfriend at the time. She was later declared missing, and her skull was found approximately 2 years later, 20 miles away, by some hunters who were looking for ginseng. So at this time, Zachary Adams faces the death penalty in this trial. So we have here that the prosecution in this case has charged Zachary Adams, along with 2 other defendants, with premeditated murder, aggravated rape, and aggravated kidnapping. So what we know from this case is they're actually seeking the death penalty because the special prosecutor in this case, by the name of Jennifer Nichols, is saying that the crime was particularly heinous. It was cruel and involved torture or serious physical abuse beyond the necessary to produce death. So what can you tell us about that particular language in regards to seeking the death penalty and the murder that actually happened? So what does the prosecution actually have to show here?
Well, it sounds like they are going above and beyond just a simple murder charge, and saying that there was a particular amount of torture, and I believe they say she was tortured and raped, and maybe over a particular amount of time, and that was egregious, so egregious that it rises to the level where the death penalty should be sought, and that's the difference. Right. So
what we have Holly Bobo. We know that there may have been actually some video of the actual rape that took place. The prosecution has not been able to find that video yet, but we actually know that there is an individual by the name of Sandra King who testified that she saw this alleged video and that she didn't actually see the rape take place, but she actually saw Holly Bobo in the video and with, I believe it was Zachary Adams at the time. What do you think about that? Is this something that, do you believe that the prosecution should have Sandra King come in to testify, or is that proper for the prosecution to have Sandra King to come in and testify regarding this video that we have not even seen yet?
I mean, the prosecution can try their case however they want.
Right.
I mean, if I'm the defense attorney,
right,
I'm going to be saying, well, where's the video?
Right.
You know, all we have is her word. I mean, the whole case seems a little suspect.
Really? Why do you think so?
Well, I say that because, first of all, they arrested the 2, Zachary and I believe the other young man, John Adams. And then later they arrested 2 other men who they later let go. It doesn't seem as though there's anything that directly connects them other than the fact that they thought they were kind of bad guys and they knew about them and they were in the area. So I'm kind of interested to see exactly what evidence they have, because I don't think there was an ID by the brother. The brother doesn't seem to have gotten a good look at him because he says he thought it was her boyfriend.
Right, right.
So that's out as far as I'm concerned. That makes that ID kind of really shaky. And then this woman saying she saw a video that they don't have. So where's the proof?
I mean, that's a great point. There's no video, so where's the proof? She can only testify to something, and so then it would be up to the jury members to determine whether or not she's credible. Do they believe what she's saying, or do they really want to see this tape? Because another thing that we have here is that a gun that the prosecution is bringing in, or is trying to bring in, a gun that was allegedly that they're trying to tie into this murder.
But wasn't that gun inoperable? I read that the gun is inoperable.
Well, yes, it is inoperable at this time, but we also have to think of the fact that the gun is now found approximately 6 years after the actual murder occurred, and so we know that it's heavily rusted. They could not test for ballistics. They couldn't test for DNA. There's no blood evidence. There's nothing linking Adams to this actual case. I mean, to the actual gun. Do you think that it's worth it for the prosecution to even bring that up here in this case?
If I was the defense, I'd want to bring them up, because it sounds like their whole case is like shoestrings. There's nothing really there.
They're just trying to
throw everything
in
but the kitchen sink and see what sticks. That's what they're doing.
So, I mean, I'm trying to really comprehend why the prosecution would bring this up, because as a former prosecutor, I'm thinking, well, you know, we have Zachary Adams, we have the testimony from his brother John Adams, not the testimony, but we have the confession from his brother John Adams stating exactly what happened. So now he wants to come back and say that he was coerced, but we at least have this confession from the time. Now bringing in this gun that's now found 6 years later that does not have any type of DNA evidence on it, no ballistics testing, there's nothing tying Zachary Adams to this gun. I don't know if it's something that would actually confuse the jury members or actually make them believe that, you know, we're just the prosecution is just trying to pull at anything to convict this person.
And I agree with you. I think that's what the jury's going to think.
Right.
Because even though you have this so-called confession, of course there was a deal made with him because he's involved in whatever he's confessing to, and maybe he's just scared. I mean, in my opinion, they took these 3 guys, they picked them up because they thought they were bad, and they thought they could get something to stick. They got one of them to say that they were involved in it because he wanted a deal to get out, because he's like, oh, they're going to say we did it,
Right.
even if we didn't.
Right. And so what we know from this case is that John Dylan Adams, he's expected to testify, or he's expected to be called to testify. But we do know that he's most likely going to claim, you know, the Fifth Amendment when he does get up there. But what I do want to talk about is the fact that he provided this confession, but later stated that he was coerced into providing this testimony, this confession. I keep saying testimony, this confession. We find that happens a lot with defendants, and sometimes that may be in fact true, because we do know that there are instances in which the defendant or the alleged defendant at that time is brought in and kept in, you know, the interrogation room for long periods of time, more than 24 hours. They don't have anything to drink. So talk to us a little bit about those situations in which an individual states that they are coerced, but actually did happen. What details would have to happen? What kind of details are, or would a court look to in order to determine whether or not a defendant was actually coerced in a particular case to providing a confession?
Well, really, they look to the factors, like where were they at, how long were they there, were they offered food or drink? I mean, if you have someone for days, for 2 or 3 days, and you're just questioning them, and you really are not giving them an opportunity to eat properly or sleep properly. I mean, there's been several cases through the years that showed that these confessions that are obtained from clients are not reliable,
Right.
because of the circumstances under which they were obtained. And so I would disagree if someone were to say that the fact that this happens all the time and that it doesn't necessarily mean that defendants are, that they weren't involved. I think that, you know, when you're caught up with police, you got several police officers questioning, even if you have one police officer questioning you, you can't leave, you're not free to leave, you're scared, they're telling you you could go to jail for lots of years. A lot of people would say things that they really didn't do.
Right.
They really, because they're under that kind of pressure. And so with this case, if that's all they have, and now the guy is coming back and saying that I was coerced,
Right.
they really don't have much of a case.
Wow.
I don't see proof beyond a reasonable doubt, certainly.
Wow, wow, wow. So another thing that we know here is the fact that there was a possible alternate suspect by the name of Terry Britt. And Terry Britt was an individual who had a history of sexual assault in the past. He actually had sex crimes from 1977, 1987, 1996, and 2008. And he actually lived 10 miles away from Bobo when she disappeared. How do you think that plays into the prosecution's case? The fact that Mr. Britt was not really brought in to, he wasn't really investigated at the time. So how do you think that, I think it goes back to what you were saying, so the fact that they just thought these individuals were bad, and you know, they just wanted to lay these crimes on these particular individuals, but yet they did not complete their investigation with Terry Britt. What are you thinking about that?
I'm thinking it goes right along the same, that it's a shoddy investigation. They don't have a real case here. They're really just taking these 3 guys and they stuck with them. Because remember, they arrested 2 other guys.
Right.
And then let them go.
Right.
And if I'm the defense and I cross-examine the detectives in this case, that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be cross-examining them about the fact that, isn't it true that you arrested 2 other men? right? And and then if there's this other guy out there, what about this guy? Did you consider him as a suspect? And doesn't he meet the same criteria as the 3 guys that you did arrest and that are on trial here? You have nothing more against these 3 guys than you do the 2 guys you arrested and let go, or Terry Gray.
They will accept that confession.
Which is not even reliable.
So another thing that we know that the prosecution is trying to bring in is the actual bones, Holly Bobo's bones. The defense is saying that it's inflammatory. Do you think that it's inflammatory? Do you think that in seeing the victim's bones in this case, that it will inflame the members of the jury so much that they would have no other option but to say that the defendant in this case is guilty?
I do think it's inflammatory. It's probably going to come in, but I do think it's inflammatory. The purpose of that really is just that the danger is that the jury will just say, oh God, this poor woman was killed. Somebody should be held responsible.
Yeah.
And why not them? If the police think they did it, how are we going to say he didn't do it? And then this poor family gets no resolution to their daughter's death.
Right.
And that's just not fair. It has to be based on evidence and not on the fact that the jury is afraid that they're just going to no one's going to be held responsible.
Okay, and so we also know that the other individuals who were charged in this case will probably come in to testify in this matter as well, and that they have been provided some type of immunity. Now, with immunity, and we've seen this in previous cases here on the LawNewz Network, especially with the Aaron Hernandez matter, when individuals are provided with immunity, we often find that sometimes the individuals may have had more of a part to play in this crime or in this alleged crime than the prosecution may have known to begin with, initially, but that there's nothing that they can really do about it afterwards because the individuals have already received this immunity deal, but there's nothing that the prosecution can then do about it afterwards. What do you think about the prosecution providing immunity to these defendants? Is it worth it just for the testimony, knowing that you can't come back around now and charge these particular defendants with anything else?
Well, I guess it's a difficult question for me because I'm a defense attorney.
Right.
If I'm representing the person that's getting immunity, it's a great deal.
Right.
That's what we want. You don't want to have to take responsibility for something that you might have been involved in, or maybe I got less time. My client gets less time. That's a great deal for us. On the part of the prosecution, I guess it's worth it to them because they feel like they get the person that is actually on trial that they're actually targeting. In the Aaron Hernandez trial, for example, they wanted Aaron Hernandez.
Right.
And it didn't seem to matter if they felt that the person who was testifying against Aaron Hernandez might have been even more culpable than Aaron Hernandez.
Right.
So that's how the prosecution plays. I'm not a prosecutor, so that's how I feel.
Well, I mean, it is at the end of the day, it is the prosecution's burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this particular defendant or these defendants, as we know in this case, actually did commit this crime. So they're going to actually do whatever they need to do to provide or to bring in the evidence needed to actually convict this individual. Now, we know that Zachary is being charged with premeditated murder and stands the death penalty if actually convicted. So what are we thinking about this? Do you think that the jury members will actually, is there a chance that he could face the death penalty here in this case? I know that, you're saying that you don't think that the prosecution will be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did commit these heinous crimes, but what do you think the jury is going to think here?
Well, my understanding is when the jury is seated, they have to be a death qualified jury. So that means they've already said if they get to that point, they would be able, if the proper evidence is laid before them, they'd be able to agree that the death penalty should be rendered. So if they find him guilty of this, I think that could happen, that he could get the death penalty, because it does seem a particularly heinous crime. It is a young woman, and there's a lot to be said for her, and that she was a nurse doing what she's supposed to do, living her life, going to school, and those things. And these men tortured and raped her for hours. And if they think they videotaped it, that puts another level on it.
Yeah.
And so if they can prove their case, then he's in real danger.
Well, we're actually going to take it live to the courtroom right now. We're having some live feed. The judge is on the bench in the Holly Bobo matter. Stay tuned.